Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, April 5th, 2024, and we will be convening the meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council in just a couple of minutes. We've opened the virtual meeting room doors to give everybody a chance to make their way in and get settled. We've got nearly 200 folks signed up for this meeting, so welcome, and we'll get business underway in just another minute or two. Again, we're providing a couple of minutes for everybody to join the virtual meeting room. We've got about 100 in right now, but we have close to 200 folks signed up. So I want to give everyone a chance. Okay, well, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, April 4th, 2024. This is the monthly meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. And first order of business will be the call of the roll.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFantorum.
Present.
Councilmember Farrell.
Here.
Chair Hall.
Present.
Councilmember Lee. I know you're here, but I can't hear you.
We saw you just a couple of minutes ago.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Minna.
Good.
Thank you. For the record, Councilmember Rogers has been excused today. Councilmember Harris.
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Present.
And Councilmember Meehan. For the record, Councilmember Meehan was having some technical difficulties this morning and she is trying to get connected. We still do have quorum, Chair Hall.
Great, thanks so much. And to get things started, I'm going to present my monthly chair's report. This month, we commemorate the 56th anniversary of the passage of the Fair Housing Act. This landmark civil rights law was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson on April 11th, 1968, and it made discrimination in housing transactions unlawful. Now, well, this was the intent. We know that all these decades later, discrimination is still among us. It can be a broad term. It can take many forms. Fair housing means that all of us, regardless of our race, where we're born, our gender, or whether we have a disability, have equal access to safe and stable housing. Both the council and Oregon Housing and Community Services believe that everyone in this state and country deserves to live free from discrimination, bias, and danger. This month and every month, OHCS is taking meaningful action to advance housing justice. This is not only the work of those most impacted, but of all of us. OHCS has been engaged formally and consistently been engaged in conscious building work with the very goal of putting that conscious building into action. As the chair, I see this work as non-negotiable. As the agency is growing to apply learnings toward advancing racial justice, I expect it not to be easy and discomfort to be experienced at certain moments. And my hope for us is that we remain steady and accountable. And now I'm going to pass things over to our agency director, Andrea Bell. Good morning, Director Bell.
Morning, Chair Hall, members of the council. I'm going to yield my time, Chair Hall, so we can get right into the agenda this morning.
All right, very good then. And we will, if the folks with housing stabilization are ready, we're ready to hear from you. And I believe we've got, let's see. Director Smith, are you and your team ready? We're a little early in the
We
schedule.
are a little early. It looks like Colt is here. Is Tim here yet? Tim is here. Let's give Tim just a minute. Maybe he stepped away for a second.
Dr. Smith, I see Tim is on, so if we want to, just for the sake of time, maybe go ahead and get started.
Okay, we will. Good morning, Chair Hall and council members and Director Bell. So excited to be here with you this morning. I'm Jill Smith. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of the Housing Stabilization Division. I'm thrilled to bring you two presentations this morning on programs that are just really indicative of the work the staff in the division are doing across the state with multiple partners with a true eye towards racial equity. And I've flipped the agenda a little bit. First, we'll be hearing from Colt Stray and Tim Mahern Macias, and they will be talking about the By and For initiative with the Native American tribes of Oregon. BAFI-NATO is what we refer to because that is a mouthful. And I want them to have plenty of time to share this information. Then we'll go on to hear from Danielle Safford, who is going to share information about our weatherization program. Specifically, she's going to talk to you about the state plan, which she just completed in cooperation with community members across the state. But we're also going to use this opportunity for her to help you understand and be aware of the amazing impact that program is having on affordable housing across our state. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Colt and Tim.
Thank you, Director Smith and Executive Director Bell. Good morning, Chair Hall and council members. I am going to share my screen, and if someone can confirm that they are seeing the slideshow.
Looks good, Colt.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. My name is Colt Stray. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am a homeless services program coordinator within our Housing Stabilization Division. And I am joined here today by my colleague, Tim Mahern Macias, who is our agency's tribal liaison. And so we're here today to provide an information briefing around our By and For Initiative Native American Tribes of Oregon program, or BAFI-NATO as we're calling it. So to dive in a little bit into the background and intent. So BAFI-NATO, the program represents a series of direct allocations made to the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, beginning in the 21-23 biennium via House Bill 5202, and then spanning into the current biennium 23-25 through Senate Bill 5511, our agency's budget bill, and House Bill 5019, which was the bill with the executive order declaring homelessness state of emergency. So this is the first time our agency has provided direct allocations to the tribes. And so part of a meaningful shift in the way we think about equitable distribution of funding to our partners. And the intent of these funds has been and continues to be creating either new or supporting existing local programs that are designed to prevent and reduce homelessness and housing instability in tribal communities across Oregon. And when we talk about the background and the intent, it's really important to mention that the data that's available to us shows that tribal members within the state are overrepresented in homelessness by more than 4 times their share of the state population. And data also shows that those who identify as American Indian or Alaska Native are more likely to experience unsheltered homelessness. And the other thing we know through a lot of learning with engagement with our tribal partners is that this existing data that's available to us, whether it's the point in time count, census data, does not fully capture the extent of housing instability in tribal communities. And so I just want to elevate that as well. We recognize BAFI-NATO is a starting point and a support. It's not the be all end all, but it has provided the opportunity to invest in partnership with the sovereign tribal nations of Oregon as they build on projects and solutions that are tailored to deliver these services in their communities. So from the onset, representatives from each of the 9 tribes were engaged in designing and developing this program really from the ground up. And so I want to turn it over to Tim to dive a little more into what that engagement looked like.
Awesome. Good morning, Council, Housing Stability Council. My name is Tim Mayer Macias. I use he, him pronouns. I'm in the Eddy office here at OHCS. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the engagements we had with the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon. And so that engagement around BAFI-NATO, there's a number of different methods we did. So first we had numerous one-on-ones with the 9 tribes of Oregon to talk about the program, the funding, the program guidance. It was I believe about a 6-month-long process before we were able to put together those agreements and get stuff to procurement and the DOJ. In addition to those one-on-ones, we also, I facilitate a tribal housing work group here at OHCS every month. It's a subgroup of under the LCIS, the Legislative Commission on Indian Services, that happens under the economic development meetings. And that every month meeting is an opportunity for tribal housing directors, tribal council members, health and services directors, or other tribal staff to meet with us and OHCS program staff to discuss upcoming programs and opportunities, give feedback and such. We also do BAFI-NATO office hours, so twice a month. COLT operates a BAFI-NATO office hours where tribes can drop in if they have programmatic questions or need support on things around BAFI-NATO. So that's another kind of touch point we have with the tribes. And in addition to those, we also attended LCIS cluster meetings to discuss this BAFI-NATO program. We did that at the Health and Human Services meetings, as well as the Economic Development meetings. Those are cluster meetings. As far as input, we used a consensus model on decision making. So we needed 9 yeses before we proceeded with anything. The tribes were really engaged in the development of the allocation formula, as well as the expenditure parameters. And throughout this whole process, and even after the first rollout of BAFI-NATO, there's been the kind of development and ongoing edits to written program guidance based off tribal feedback. So as far as applications and training and technical assistance, this BAFI-NATO is non-competitive application, and because it's non-competitive, the agency is able to provide kind of direct support and assistance to the tribes around their applications, requests, concerns, things of that nature. We also provide technical assistance upon request to help ensure compliance. Colt, do you want to go to the next slide? So the other big thing was addressing barriers. So barriers between Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes and OHCS funding have existed since OHCS's creation. Some of the barriers that we heard from the tribes was hiring capacity. Often the tribes are rural and there's highly competitive job markets. And because of the way we fund and the state funds, there's no long-term OHCS dedicated funding, which can make it hard to recruit people. Additionally, during the bidding process, the tribes can have very low number of bidders, and so there's often a need for sole source procurement when it comes to some of these projects. And the other big thing is through this BAFI-NATO engagement, there are two big barriers that we were able to address. One is a major one, which required the tribes to waive limited sovereign immunity. So it was an infringement on tribal sovereignty in those contracts, and we were able to get rid of that for this BAFI-NATO program. And the other big one is we were able to honor tribes' federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreements, or NICRAs. Those are typically higher than admin, and the tribes need those additional funds typically to help run these programs. This is also, BAFI-NATO is the first time all 9 federally recognized tribes have participated in the OHCS program. I believe there are more than 30 years. So we definitely had some work to do, but very happy with this. And Colt, I think it's back to you.
Thanks, Tim. So as Tim's been describing, gathering and incorporating feedback and kind of staying in a place of constant learning has been a major tenet of administering this program. And so most of the 21-23 agreements were executed fairly late into the biennium. And so we were hearing from a lot of our tribal partners just concerns about being able to spend down the awards within such a tight time frame and with staff capacity concerns. So as an agency, we made the decision in June of 2023 to advance all 21-23 BAFI-NATO awards up front and extend the expenditure deadline to June 30th, 2025, rather than the original date of June 30th, 2023. So this gave tribes the time and also the flexibility to continue developing and launching projects that would make the most impact within their community rather than having to find a way to get money out the door on a time crunch. And so that was a big shift that took place once those amendments took hold. So I wanted to share a little bit with these funds, BAFI-NATO projects that have already been placed into service or will soon be placed into service. They really do cover a wide range of activities. So to share a few, homelessness prevention has been a really highly utilized category and can cover a lot from rental assistance, utility assistance, mortgage assistance, landlord mediation, and also minor home repairs that if they don't take place, a person or family may be at risk of losing a safe place to stay. And then we also have rental assistance more on the rehousing side of things. So move-in costs, security deposits, utility deposits, first month's rent, and in some cases, ongoing rental assistance as well. Outreach to folks who are unhoused and unsheltered, and also development, rehabilitation, and conversion of shelter and transitional housing sites. So actually the more capital construction development of projects, and then also ongoing operation costs for shelter and transitional housing sites, as well as supportive housing sites. Capacity building, a handful of tribes have utilized this funding to bring on consultants in the planning phase to launch some of these projects, and then data collection as well, which we'll touch on more here in a moment. And in the current biennium, 23-25, we're really excited about the $10 million total funding amount. which we're calling BAFI NATO Wave 2. And it is a combination, as we mentioned earlier, 5 million from House Bill 5019 and 5 million allocated for tribes in our agency's budget bill. I think true to sort of the guiding principles of this program, we've continued incorporating suggestions from tribal partners to improve the delivery. And one big thing was reaching consensus on combining those two $5 million allocations kind of into one BAFI NATO vehicle. It was a familiar program and reduced kind of that administrative burden of having to track multiple grants, especially when the scopes of work and allowabilities for the two funding sources really matched up and aligned well. And so that was something with the tribes we chose to kind of funnel into the BAFI NATO program. So a couple of things that we focused on improving or changing in this second wave was language within the contracts and program guidance that better protected tribal member personal data, respected internal tribal procurement processes, removed unnecessary layers of OHCS approval, and expanded on homelessness prevention guidance and allowability. To date, just as an update, we have 3 of the 9 agreements fully executed for the current biennium, and the remainder are in that final stage of review. And so wanted to share a little bit. There's already been an incredible amount of work done with these funds across the 9 tribes, both on and off reservation. And there's also a handful of projects that are still in the development phase that we'll look forward to seeing get off the ground. So to that point, I want to note the data reflected here that we've collected is indicative of 5 of the 9 tribes so far. Everyone's kind of at different stages with their projects. And so what you'll see here is current as of March 22nd, 2024. So there are 26 distinct projects. So a couple of tribes have multiple projects doing different things. Total number of individuals served, you can see 1,076 folks, and currently enrolled 780 people. And just want to highlight the number of people that have exited to a permanent destination so far with what we see 299 people. You can see some of the dollar amounts in your packet as well for total dollars allocated to specific categories of client assistance. And I definitely want to point out, additionally, funding has supported the development and kind of capital development of 2 shelter sites and 3 transitional housing sites on tribal land. So, you know, we know HMIS can aggregate data from kind of the client level, but doesn't really show the projects or developments that are that more capital construction in nature. So overall, a lot of learning and a lot to be excited about. And again, we're thinking of this program as only the beginning as we look forward to a long relationship with tribal partners. And I think Tim is going to share a little bit more about what's coming next.
Yeah, thank you, Colt. So I think the next question for all of us is what's next, right? What are we going to do next as an agency? What are we looking ahead to? And so I think one, we're always thinking about the impact on other divisions have towards tribal funding, what other opportunities exist. We're looking at kind of this continued need for more consolidated, flexible, and predictable funding dedicated to the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon across the entire agency. And as part of that, last year, the entirety of 2023, OHCS collaborated with our tribal partners to develop a recommendation for a state-funded tribal housing block grant beginning in the 25-27 biennium that would encompass direct allocations from housing stabilization, affordable rental housing, and home ownership division. Ultimately, I think the intent of that is to kind of uplift tribal sovereignty, self-determination, and most importantly, self-governance with regards to funding. And so what does that mean? It means this recommendation for ongoing current service level funding is currently part of our agency's policy option package. So this would be a wonderful opportunity to, I think, continue this type of good work that we've seen from BAFI-NATO extended across all of our divisions, and really have the impact, give the tribes the opportunity to have the impact they want when it comes to housing for their members and their communities. So I believe that's all. And we'll open it up to questions.
Councilmember DeFontorum.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to share a few thoughts here. First, my appreciation for Colt and Tim in particular, as they've really stuck with us and made this program a reality. This was not a small, insignificant thing to the 9 tribes. This is really the first time that we've had funding directly from the state, from OHCS, that really acknowledges and embraces self-determination. Each of the 9 tribes does housing differently. We tailor programs and services to meet the needs of our members on our respective reservations. And the BAFI-NATO funding really allows us to do that. So I wanted to give them both a shout out. They're really engaged with the monthly meetings that I don't always attend, but I know they're both there. And they've made this as low barrier for tribes to access the funding as humanly possible, I think. So it's a work in progress, I believe, but it's going in the right direction. And so, you know, thanks to both of you. On behalf of all the tribes, I'll speak for a moment. We all appreciate it very much.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I want to add my thanks and appreciation to Councilmember DeFontorum. I particularly want to lift up the 2 structural among many changes that you all covered today. The first of which was the requirement that tribes would have to give up their sovereignty in order to enter into a contract with the state, which is patently ridiculous. And secondly, that we are, you know, again, no wonder we haven't had relationships with tribal nations when we have asked them to give up their sovereignty in order to be in relationship for us. So I just want to lift that up. It seems like a small thing, and it is enormous, both for the relationships, but also for us as an agency to realize that we got to do some things differently. We got to push some things that maybe haven't been comfortable, or we didn't want to get on the wrong side of law, or, you know, whatever it was. What I see here is a lot of pushing to be different and to be responsive and to be in partnership. And I just want to thank you and everyone involved for that. And the second thing I want to raise up is it's been way too long, but we understand why, that the tribes have not been a part of the regular funding for this organization, and the intention and the willingness to get them into the allocation of funds. You know, I realize is the first step, but there should be full participation and full access and full allocation to all the members of our state community, which include the tribal nations. So it's been way too long in coming, and I'm so thrilled. And I just thank you. I offer a lot of great gratitude, and I hope others in state government can look at what this process was. I know it wasn't easy, and look at the results and outcome and see the leadership here, because it does actually offer a pathway for other state agencies to be in better relationship, to be in full relationship with tribal nations. And that is part of what we all want. So thank you.
Anybody else on the council who would like to weigh in at this point? Then I will just say, let's see. Too many papers. You ever have that problem around you? Okay. So that concludes this presentation. Informational briefing only. Again, no action. So I guess we're ready to jump into that very thick weatherization assistance program.
Thank you so much, Chair Hall and council members. My name is Danielle. My name is Danielle Stafford, and I'm the Weatherization Program Coordinator at OHCS. I appreciate your time today and want to share with you our updated proposed work plan for the U.S. Department of Energy. I loved your opening Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty laid the groundwork for the Weatherization Assistance Program. The DOE Weatherization Assistance Program, otherwise known as WAP, provides annual grants to states, territories, and Native American tribes to improve energy efficiency of the homes of income-eligible families. We work on all types of housing, manufactured homes, single-family homes, multifamily homes, transitional homes, and shelters. We know that low-income households bear a heavier energy burden and spend approximately 13% of their annual income on energy costs. This compares to 3% for other households. Weatherization alleviates energy burden by installing measures like attic wall and floor insulation, air sealing, heating, cooling equipment, lighting, and appliances. We also address critical health and safety concerns, all at no cost to the participant. We provide each client strategies to help them understand how they can lower their own energy costs, specific to the home that they live in. Most of the homes that we see have fallen into disrepair. Some are beyond what our regulations will allow us to address, leaving families without any alternative but to stay and get by, and leaving us no choice but to place the household in a deferred status. In the last year, DOE has provided additional set-aside funding to address these issues that are keeping homes from being weatherized. These additional funds are called Weatherization Readiness Funds and have allowed us in the last year to provide 18 new roofs on homes last year. We replaced collapsed floors, we addressed plumbing and electrical disasters, and we worked to remove a hoard at one home. By addressing these issues head on, we were able to go in and apply our weatherization measures. Our deferral lists in the last year are substantially shorter, and we get to protect our investments for years to come. Oregon's good work with this new funding stream was highlighted at the NASCAS conference in Arlington, Virginia a few weeks ago. In 2023, our work resulted in nearly $300 to $400 in annual household energy savings. With utility costs on the rise, this is critical work and can keep folks in their homes. We continually hear feedback from our clients that without weatherization, they might have been homeless. There are many additional positive impacts that happen from the work that we do. Our work is stimulating the Oregon economy in every county by employing local contractors to do the work, by conscientiously hiring a diversified workforce and providing training opportunities. We get to help ourselves and our neighbors and our own communities. We're helping to preserve the low-income housing stock. We get to help moms and dads and families get to live in a healthier, safe home. On average, the DOE annual grant in our state provides services to 340 households. Collectively, with other funding streams for weatherization, we served over 1,200 households in 2023. We integrated the Justice 40 initiative for the first time last year into our DOE state plan. The federal government set a goal to extend 40% of the benefits from specific investments to reach disadvantaged communities. With targeted outreach tactics and climate and economic justice screening tool, we're continuing to play an active role in working towards energy equity. On every household that we serve, we collect demographic information, we report it, and we track it. In 2024 DOE, there will be additional reporting required that is more in-depth, and instead of providing statewide information, we'll be reporting individual service territory information. The Weatherization Assistance Program is designed to serve rental and owner-occupied households equitably since its inception in 1976. Lower-income families are prioritized based on characteristics including elderly folks, people with disabilities, families with children, households with high energy burden, and high energy usage. We're required to use and maintain a wait list, which all of our providers keep. Each characteristic provides a point that is equally weighted, and in many instances, additional points are earned based on the time spent waiting for services. Our average wait list in Oregon has over 300 households in queue. DOE WAP is slated to award the state of Oregon just under $3.7 million for the next fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2024. Today, I'm here to present our proposed US DOE state work plan for 2024. OHCS extended an invitation and convened a work group made up of Community Action Agency staff to determine areas of how the plan should evolve. Every year, a state plan work group is assembled with an invitation sent so that all community action agencies can provide their input on the changes and be directly involved with the process. The work group met to review and propose changes and generally help to improve the flow and accuracy of the document. Although much of the state plan is mandated by federal regulations, there are elements that we can affect, such as design and implementation of a comprehensive health and safety plan and training and technical assistance plan. The state plan does not typically change substantially from one year to the next. Proposed changes to the plan are few and generally based on new or revised guidance from DOE, new requirements regarding funding, and our input from service delivery partners. A memo was produced to draw attention to the updates and make the plan more manageable. A few of the highlighted changes are: our average cost per unit has increased to $8,497. This is our targeted amount of federal funds to spend on each project. This is not a hard stop of an amount, and it is averaged over time, but it is helpful to have those parameters to budget and create projections. Because our ACPU has increased, the percentage of health and safety has increased along with it. We have included verbiage to replace an unsafe gas cook stove with weatherization readiness funds if it has been tested and found unsafe. This is something brand new that we have not been able to do in the past. We included language to require a written explanation in the project file why a measure was not installed. And we included general formatting updates, including contact updates, grant period updates, production schedules. And to check out the changes in their entirety, they're outlined on the memo, which has also been posted to the OHCS website. So that is what I have for you today. I want to thank you for your time and let you know in advance that I humbly appreciate any questions, comments, or feedback that you'd like to provide.
Chair Hall, looks like you might be on mute.
Oh, thanks for catching that. Okay, council, here's your opportunity. Questions, comments, feedback. Well, I guess you had it all covered. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And now, I believe next agenda item.
Chair Hall, I'm sorry, I was a little late to the hand
Oh.
raise.
Oh, okay. Councilmember Lee, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Danielle, and for the ongoing efforts to increase and update and review this plan. I know it is a monumental task to do this every, what is it, 2 years, 4 years that we have to do it. It's a lot of work. So I appreciate your work and the work of the team. I also appreciate the call out for the equity and the Justice 40. I just, again, want to say, and I think I say this every time we see this document, that I would love for us to be more explicit about our racial justice and equity goals and plans in plain language that is easy to see and read. I realize that the federal government doesn't have the same level of ability, perhaps, to pay attention to these items. I know you and the team are working very hard to pay attention, and I think part of the education process is for us to use the language that is actually in our statewide housing plan, and more so in our hearts and values in terms of the work that we're doing, and to put that in more visibly and more more easily seen and understood, even if there isn't a question from the feds on how are you going to do this or why are you doing this, that we could be more explicit in explaining our values and where we're going with it. So I see the difference. I see the change from the last plan, and I just want to urge us to continue to push in that direction for as explicitly as we can be, because we're explicit in our statewide housing plan. And as you said, the connection between these two programs is clear and bright, and we want them to be mutually reinforcing. So thank you for the work, and that's my one comment.
Anybody else from the council with feedback? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, well, thanks again for the great report. And now, Special Initiative Division. Mike Savara, are you ready to go, sir? Catch you away from your desk for a second.
Chair Hall, I see a member of the team on, so
Okay,
perhaps we can see if they're ready to go.
okay.
Hi, I'm ready. I am only presenting a section. I think we were, yeah, but I can go ahead since we're going early.
Okay,
Okay,
thanks
thanks.
for your flexibility.
Yes, give me one moment, sorry. Thank you, Chair Hall and members of the council. My name is Liz Hearn, and I am with the Special Initiatives team. Oh, I see Ms. Perez is on, and she's going to share a PowerPoint for us.
Great.
Thank you for your patience.
Certainly.
And
Good morning, Chair
thank
Hall
you,
and
Director
council
Bell.
members. I'm just bringing up the PowerPoint. Excuse me one moment.
Okay.
And thank you, Director Bell. I'll introduce myself. My name is Liz Hearn, and I am the Unit Access and Shelter Program Manager at OHCS. Thank you.
You have those slides yet? That's still in there.
Ms. Perez, let me know if there's anything you need me to do to help. Okay.
Ah, there we go.
All right. Thank you. And Chair Hall and members of the council, I will be going over this information, but as soon as Mr. Savara hops on, he'll probably take over some of the pieces, and then I will continue later on. But thank you all for having me here today. I would like to introduce some of the work that the Special Initiatives team has been working on. Next slide, please. So Executive Order 2302, Governor Kotek signed this order declaring a state of emergency due to unsheltered homelessness in the emergency areas. This executive order prevented 8,750 households from becoming homeless statewide, and it also added 600 low barrier shelter beds in emergency areas. Additionally, it rehoused at least 1,200 unsheltered households in the emergency areas. Those emergency areas under EO 2302 were the 7 multi-agency coordination groups, so the 7 MAC groups. Next slide, please. I'm going to go ahead and let Mr. Savara speak to this slide when he joins us. Next slide, please. So under Executive Order 2302, we did have some achievements that we would like to share with all of you. The 7 MAC regions, they created 1,047 low barrier shelter beds. They also were able to rehouse 1,426 households. Additionally, 9,023 households were prevented from homelessness. These goals had to be met by January 10th, 2024. Next slide, please. So here are our 7 COC regions. Their final allocations were around 80 million. And you can see here how the shelter bed creations and the rehousing goals were administered among the 7 COCs to come to the final numbers that I spoke to you all about before. Next slide, please. Here is the same representing the balance of state regions. These regions, like the 7 COCs, also had to meet a shelter and rehousing goal. However, these goals were not under EO 2302. They were just goals that were created with OHCS to support the work that the rest of the state was doing around homelessness and unsheltered homelessness and rehousing. And they had they had 400, I believe it's 455 beds created, and then they rehoused 477. They are actually working toward these goals right now, and they have to meet these goals by June 30th, 2025. And this program is funded with House Bill 5019 funds. Next slide, please. I would like to share with the council the Executive Order 2402, which was passed by Governor Kotek. This is to sustain the work and carry on the work from Executive Order 2302. So one difference with this executive order is that it's really focusing on unsheltered homelessness and rehousing. There's not a shelter component to it, but there is an eviction prevention component, which we will share a little bit more about later. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Chair Hall and members of the council, I'm moving on a little bit from Executive Order 2302 and talking about the Oregon Rehousing Initiative. So OHCS is in the process of implementing the Oregon Rehousing Initiative, and Senate Bill 5701 has authorized the release of the special purpose appropriation pending signature by Governor Kotek. And this will allow $39 million in funds to be administered to a statewide rehousing program. This program will be administered to the 10 MAC groups in EO 2402. So that includes the 7 MAC groups that were part of EO 2302, in addition to the 3 MAC opt-in communities that are in the balance of state. Those 10 COCs or MAC regions, the goals connected to the Oregon Rehousing Initiative will be part of the 2402 executive order. In addition to the 10 MAC regions, these are also being allocated to 13 local planning groups, and 25% will be administered to set aside, or will be set aside for culturally responsive or culturally specific organizations. This is in response to the understanding that unsheltered homelessness and how it impacts communities in Oregon and the racial disparities. Let's see. So with this program, regions are required to make housing placements by June 30th, 2025. However, funds will be extended until 2027 to support households that have been housed through this program but need additional funds for rental assistance or supportive services. So the program ends at June 30th, 2025 with new households, but will remain until 2027 for any planning to make sure that they are able to be sustained in their homes. Let's see. I would like to share with you all that we used a collaborative process when designing this program with regions. We had several drop-in office hour sessions where regions were able to talk to us about what they were thinking about doing, run some ideas by us, and it was a very collaborative process. We also referred them to our technical assistance provider, ICF, if they needed any support. We encourage regions to use progressive engagement when planning for this program, with the idea that we understand that some regions will need more support than others, or some households will need more support than others, and thinking through that process to make sure it's an effective rehousing program. We are in the process right now of gathering information and plans and finalizing allocations, and we're hoping to have agreements executed by the end of May. Next slide, please. Chair Hall and members of the council, I'll now be talking about sustaining efforts from EO 2302. Senate Bill 5511 funds are being used to sustain efforts from EO 2302 and programs developed under House Bill 5019. These investments will be through the remainder of the 23-25 biennium. They include $65 million that will be administered to the MAC regions, the 7 COCs, and this will be specifically to sustain shelter, anything utilized to help with unit access and to help support households in getting access to the actual apartments, and then street outreach. We were able to determine this amount and this need by speaking to all the 7 COCs and really getting a strong understanding of what they needed to sustain efforts until 2025, based on what was established under EO 2302. Additionally, $39.7 million will be administered to the COCs for a long-term rental assistance program, and $55 million will be administered to the statewide to the community action agencies for additional households to prevent homelessness. This includes a 30% set aside for culturally specific partners. Thank you. I'll now let my coworker, Ms. Perez, share about the long-term rental assistance program.
Oh, you're on mute.
I am done. I'm waiting for Ms. Perez to share about the long-term rental assistance program. Oh, were you talking to?
Yeah.
Okay.
My apologies. Thank you, Ms. Hearn, Chair Hall, and council members. I think we can return now that Director Savara, we can go back to the original slide. Liz shared the most of them, but I can return to this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, if we could just go right there, that would be awesome. Chair Hall, members of the council, it's great to be with you all. Apologies for my delay. You all are moving fast through the agenda today. I wanted to just talk through a bit of how we actually worked through the process of centering racial equity as we were designing the implementation of Executive Order 2302. So we talked a lot about sort of the processes that we've been going through, the programs and the different interventions, but I think this is an important part of how, as we were sitting down to design this intervention and design this strategy overall, we received a lot of support from our national TA partners, as well as real clear direction from Director Bell that we needed to think about how we were centering racial equity as we were designing this emergency response. I think it's very obvious to say that too many times during emergency responses, we fail to think about how the impacts of our actions during those emergency responses will disparately impact communities of color and other marginalized groups. This trend, especially in government, I think is really, we've seen this during the pandemic. We've really learned a lot from those times when we had to move fast, we had to move swiftly to respond to a problem, and we see people left behind, we see groups left behind. And so in this development process, we really tried to center ourselves, learn from what worked and what did not work during past emergency responses. And one of the tools that we use is we had a racial disparities analysis as part of the application process. So any funding that went out for the MAC groups, these multi-agency coordinating groups, had to answer questions and receive data. We provided the data on the specific racial disparities that were in their community. And so I've shown just like a glimpse of what that application process looked like here on the screen here. This is actually a part of our local planning group folks from Benton County, which is a member of the Balance of State. I think I wanted to highlight them as a really good example of a community that really took the call that we were asking. We said, hey, we don't want to just move forward with accomplishing these goals overall. While we did do that, we want to also make sure that we're using this as an opportunity to highlight and focus on those that are not getting served. And Benton County and many of our local planning group and MAC group partners used data that we provided. So here you can see on your screen, we provided this in a table that they had to look at and essentially answer questions around. So this table shows that American Indian Alaska Natives are disparately impacted by homelessness in Benton County. You can see that the rates of people experiencing homelessness according to their point in time count was higher than their prevalence in the general population according to the census. The point in time count, as we talked about with this body before, is very inadequate as a tool. It is often the tool that we have to use in some ways as well. And so we encourage communities not to just rely on this, but to use it as an indicator that there might be more that they need to do. And Benton County did a really good job of thinking deeply about how they could use the information and then go a little bit deeper. And so one thing that they saw was that these were just, again, indicators that something was going on in their community amongst American Indian Alaska Natives with respect to how they were showing up in the homelessness population. So they actually went to coordinated entry data. They went to their large shelters. They went to day centers, and they looked at the data of who is being served in those communities. And they actually provided that data back to us as part of their plan to help us understand the prevalence of folks that were being impacted. They found that according to the census, 7.84% of, 0.7% of the total population, according to the census, identified as American Indian Alaska Native, but that 7.84% of the total unsheltered population seeking coordinated entry services identified as American Indian Alaska Native or Indigenous. That disparity rate, I mean, is just off the charts. To think about the rate of people showing up and asking for help and identifying by this population, and how small the population, according to the census, there is, that sparked them to say, we need to get curious, we need to get strategic, we need to have conversations with our partners about how we can do better for this program. And then another thing that they saw was that folks that were entering into one of their major shelters, 11.8% of them identified as American Indian Alaska Native. That's almost over 1 in 10 folks that are showing up to the shelter are identifying as American Indian Alaska Native. And I think this is just one example of, when we come to this body and we talk about the disparities, like, this is what it looks like. It is a stark difference, and it is really driven by the lines of people of color who are experiencing homelessness at higher rates. And so we wanted to highlight this process a bit. It is not perfect. We are learning how to do this better, and we're committed to doing this in a more informed way in the future. But I definitely wanted to make sure that we highlighted the process, sort of the how that we got to some of this work. One of the things that we want to do next is that, asking communities to prioritize these groups in their plans is one thing, but checking if they actually did it is the next. Checking what the outcomes were is going to be really important. It's not enough to say, yeah, we're going to prioritize if you don't actually make that happen in reality. So we've been working with our team from the research team to design an evaluation dashboard that goes deep into the data of those that we have served under Executive Order 2302, the 1,426 households that were rehoused, as well as those households that were served but didn't end up rehoused during the reporting period, to help us understand what are some of the differences. What are those differences by race and ethnicity, maybe other intersectional identities as well. This will help us to understand how effective this process was and also provide accountability for these communities that committed to doing the prioritization, but then failed to actually implement the changes in reality. So we want to show up as partners in this process. We want to show up as folks that know that this work is difficult and that there's a long road ahead, and that we need urgent, precise action. So that evaluation dashboard, as well as a process that we're working on to enable qualitative feedback, because we know it's not enough just to look at the numbers. We also have to understand the experience of folks that were served. So we have a variety of partners that are going to enable us to be able to think about what the lived experience perspective has been, especially based on those marginalized identities, but also thinking about how providers experience the process of actually going through this. So we're excited about that over the next year, because we are committed to learning as an organization, and we're not going to try something and then sort of forget about it. We want to learn and try and learn and try in this iterative process. So this is a big part of our work over the next year as we reflect on what happened during Executive Order 2302, try to incorporate those learnings into 2402, and then move forward into our processes in the future. So wanted to highlight that, and definitely would love to take questions after our presentation. We have a couple more slides that we'll touch on. And if we could move to the long-term rental assistance piece, I think that would be perfect.
Thank you, Director Savara. Yes, I'll move us on to speak about the long-term rent assistance program. I think Ms. Hearn shared in her last slide information on how the legislature appropriated $39.7 million to OHCS for the long-term rent assistance program in the 23-25 biennium in order to sustain rehousing efforts of the executive order and House Bill 5019. I'll just briefly cover a high-level overview of the program, and OHCS is always happy to come back and further provide in-depth information on the program and its movement forward and implementation. The LTRA program will help with the cost of rent to increase housing access and long-term housing stability for people exiting homelessness. This type of assistance has proven to be a key strategy to support housing stability, and for some people, it's vital to their ability to stay housed. The funding for LTRA, the Long-Term Rent Assistance Program, will be made available through an allocation process to regional multi-agency coordination groups, MAC groups, across the 7 executive order regions. To provide a little bit of a background on our process towards implementation, I'll share this, this short timeline. OHCS began by finalizing a project framework in May of last year, and then identified members of a work group to engage in creating the program guidance. The group started meeting in late summer of last year and consisted of representatives from the 7 executive order region communities. We also incorporated participation from our consultants at ICF, who've played a big part in helping us build out the work that we've been doing around all of the executive order implementation. And we as well partnered with Portland State University. We incorporated participation, as I mentioned, from PSU, and specifically Dr. Marisa Zapata from the Homeless Research and Action Collaborative to research other long-term rent assistance programs, specifically as it related to racial injustices and considerations when developing service programs. Their research findings and recommendations were incorporated in the build out of the program guidance. A few areas where we looked at some of those recommendations with the intent to reduce racial inequities were considerations around reducing barriers in application process, documentation requirements, tenant screenings, and also background checks. And where we are in the process right now for the implementation of the program is that we are asking regions to provide a detailed plan for the community, for their communities, for local system design purposes based on our program guidance. And our projected timeline for final program implementation is slated at this point for May to early June of 2024. So that concludes our final program information, and happy to move into any question if time allows, as Mike said, also in the section that he covered earlier. So thank you, Chair Hall and council members.
Okay, thank you very much. First up will be Councilmember Farrell, and then Councilmember DeFontorum, and then Councilmember Rodriguez. So, Councilmember Farrell.
Thanks, Chair Hall. First of all, I just really appreciate that slide on the racial disparities and taking the time to reflect on what was learned from prior efforts and being really intentional. I feel like so often that step is missed, so that really like pinpoints with absolute visual clarity some issues around that. I guess in along those lines, so obviously like targeting some of the populations that would have been missed due to a variety of reasons. Are there other intentions or outcomes that the state has for the long-term rental assistance program, considering the somewhat short nature of the funding? Are there along the same lines of like, we want to see that you're not just saying you're addressing racial equity, but we want to see that you did? In addition to that, are there other expected outcomes? And I guess part two of that question is like, what are you seeing so far in the different communities that are working on this, like as challenges to this? It's a big lift for communities to develop this type of program in a relatively short period of time, especially those who didn't currently have similar types of programs. So I'm just sort of curious, like, if there's themes or trends that are coming up in those office hours sessions around like different challenges that communities are having so far. I know that was a lot, sorry.
Councilmember Farrell, thank you so much for the questions. Yeah, happy to talk more through some of these pieces. So the long-term rental assistance program, to start there, I think that the primary purpose of that, and we're happy to dive more into some of the details. I know today we had a pretty high level overview of some of these programs. The primary purpose of that for this biennium really is to provide that ongoing rental assistance and those supportive services for those that we rehoused during Executive Order 2302. So that those households need ongoing assistance through the end of the biennium. I really see this biennium as the beginning of that groundwork for the system that we need to build in order to make sure that we have the ongoing assistance for people getting placed out of homelessness and into housing, and then really moving forward into those long-term placements. That is really a missing ingredient in so many of our communities, the long-term rental assistance supports that people need, recognizing that if incomes and rental costs are not aligned, we need folks that be able to have those supportive services and rental assistance. The areas around race equity, I think, that are really important around long-term rental assistance is that as we're building out this program, one of the directives that we really wanted to highlight and think and center is that often federal voucher programs have been either blatantly or inadvertently supportive of practices that really discriminate or limit people of color who need access to things. So a good example of that is just limitations around making sure where you can use a voucher, I think, is a common example. And so we've seen trends in the federal voucher program that really make folks make it inaccessible to actually use their voucher in a place in a neighborhood that of that community's choosing. And so that aspect of discrimination or segregation that continues in some of the federal voucher practices is something we were really cautious about, and wanted to think, as we were designing the program, how do we make sure that we can build in more flexibility than the federal voucher program, so that communities are not having to just repeat the thing that isn't working for many communities, but that we can actually learn from where those types of interventions are not working. And so I think, kind of going into that, one of the big things that we've seen trend-wise in terms of the development process is really the fact that many of our communities, like you said so eloquently, that we just don't have a program like this that's state funded and long-term supported rental assistance. And so we've really been engaging our public housing authority partners in really strategic ways over the last few months, as well as our partners, the COCs that have been in direct conversation with the public housing authorities. I would say that a lot of the public housing authorities, some of the big concerns that we've been hearing is that they want to know that this is a priority for the agency, a priority for the future. And they also want to know that this is something that they can take and incorporate things that are working for them. So a great example is we were discussing a federal program that really tried to take some of these flexibilities to heart. The Emergency Housing Voucher, or EHV voucher program. And again, there are great things about that program that enable communities to rapidly rehouse people experiencing homelessness during the pandemic. And there's aspects of it that might not work so well, especially with regard to race equity. But they asked, hey, can we use that as a model? Can we use EHV as a model for creating our state-funded long-term rental assistance program? And by and large, that is an ability for them to just quickly adopt things that were working or that worked during the pandemic, change things that don't work for them, or maybe make modifications based on their own learnings, and then move forward rather than creating a brand new thing from the ground up. Really using what is working, what is enabling them to move forward. So I think that capacity piece is going to be a continued need for our partners. And that's not to mention the supportive services that are necessary to keep people in the housing. I think that's going to be a really big aspect of this project, is that we have to both provide that rental assistance, but the supportive services are so critical to making sure that the communities have what they need. I also think that culturally responsive and specific services are going to be an important part of the long-term rental assistance program, so that when someone is in need of the supportive services, those services are delivered in a way that is supportive of their needs, whatever those may be. So I think that's going to be an important aspect of both of those pieces working well together over the long haul. We're right in the midst of really thinking about 2025, 2027, and we're excited about really thinking about where this project could go in the future if the legislature were to move this forward in the future.
All right, Councilmember DeSantorum.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you, Director Savara, for your presentation and also for your staff and their presentation. So I have a couple of thoughts. The homeless statistics for Native American and Alaska Native persons in the state are pretty consistent. I don't see a lot of shifting, which suggests to me that things haven't really changed dramatically for Native people in the state. And so I think data is great. What I'm really interested in is what is the result of the data. It's a beautiful thing to have data, to understand it, and to say, wow, this is really jarring, it's shocking. You know, those things are true. But how is it being utilized? Is it informing funding? Is it informing program design? I know that's not like a question to answer right now, but I think what I would like to see, you know, down the road is what was the result? How was this data used in a way to move the needle on the number, I guess. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you so much. Really great presentation.
You're on mute, Chair
Sorry
Hall.
about that, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Hall. And so sorry I'm not on camera today. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, but Director Savara, Liz, I just wanted to share my gratitude and appreciation for your team and your staff for having to do this in such a short period of time. I also appreciate the fact that when it comes to rural communities, you guys have been able to let us think outside of the box and not be so siloed. I know that a lot of surrounding agencies in rural communities, we feel like we're all siloed, we're all doing our own work by ourselves. So I appreciate the fact that you have pushed us to actually not feel so siloed and actually reach out to other community partners, local government officials, to really do the work and actually get things done for something that has been a fact of NIMBYism that we've suffered in communities that are rural communities and also communities that have a very high impact that are affecting folks that are of different cultures that live in our areas. So I really commend you on your work, and I commend you on actually working with other communities that may not have to, that fit the check boxes, and we've had to think outside of the box. And I appreciate you all for working with us with this new work that we're all encountering at this time. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I'll both join the appreciation and thanks and gratitude to the team, and a couple of questions. The data is really important, and I appreciate Mike, you and the team's laser focus on it. I also just want us to stop and say the data is important, but the data also has impact. Every one of those numbers are people we're talking about. And to see the kind of disparity that Councilmember DeFantorum shared with us, it's not changed. So, you know, first we get told, well, we can't understand what's going on. We can't know what until we get the data. Now we've got the data, but the data is not changing now that we have it. And so I think what's incumbent upon all of us, and you were quite eloquent in talking about the commitment, is we have to do something differently. And for me, that is not simply asking communities to take what they're doing now and say they're going to try to do it better or with greater outreach to these communities, because if that was going to work, it would have already worked. So I think it's incumbent upon us to be even more directive and have higher expectations for ourselves and our community partners to actually focus on the places where there's disparity. I think we've talked a lot of times about targeted universalism, which says we want everyone to have access to healthy, safe, affordable housing. And those who have the least access to healthy, safe, affordable housing are those where we need to put our attention and resources first. And by doing so, we are actually going to make impact for all communities, right? So there's some part of me that wants to say, I don't think anybody should be doing anything else but reporting to us how they're going to spend these resources to get at the disparities. Period. Not in general and the disparities, but the disparities. So in Benton County, and thank you, Benton County, for being the example and for doing your due diligence, the bulk, if not all of their money, I don't know where the other disparities are, should be going to working in partnership with both the urban Indian communities and the tribal nations to get that number down first, last, middle, etc. I don't think we should be expending money on populations that aren't experiencing a disparity. That is just my opinion. I also don't think we should be asking people after we've helped them what they thought about the help. That's a customer service, right? And I may be misusing your words, Mike, so I apologize. What about asking those 1 in 10 Indian people about what they thought might help them or help someone else in the future that was different than what they have access to now? We can require these kinds of things. And as you say, Mike, you were very eloquent. I was very moved by what you had to say and by this work. We could be different in our relationships with people, and we could require our contracted partners to be different in their relationships with people, because not that anything, they've done bad, but continuing to do the same practices and the same behaviors and the same services hasn't worked. And we think something's going to change, it's just not going to. So I want to urge us to ask those 1 in 10 Indigenous people what they think would help them right now and what they think would help their future generations to avoid this kind of experience, and then put the money to that. Not continuing to say, well, here's your rent assistance check, or well, here's your, your referral to the housing navigator, or well, here's your case management assignment, right? Those things and the way that we do them now don't work. And we know that because we have this data. So I just want to put another point on that. I would like us to relook at this allocation formula in service to what I just said, which is the bulk of it, not the 25% and not the 30%. The bulk of it needs to be going to the communities of color and the organizations by, for, and about those communities of color where the disproportionality is greatest is where the bulk of this money should be going. And then finally, I just have a question for curiosity. This is me talking, you don't need to respond, but now I have a question, which is, I know we've had discussions over the years about basic income as a strategy versus conditional funding that says, here, you get this money for rent assistance and you can't spend it on anything else but rent assistance. Did you all have some conversations about basic income as a strategy, and what, just a little bit briefly, where did you land on that? Because we know that when things are conditional, we get the things we've conditioned. When things are unconditional, we get the self-determination, we get the ability to build other skills that are important to the ongoing health and welfare of a community. And I'd just like to hear a little conversation about that. Thanks again. I was very, very moved by this presentation in a lot of ways, and so grateful and so appreciative.
Thanks, Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Harris.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair Hall, and thank you for the presentation, Director Savara. I agree with all the fellow council members' comments that it was a wealth of information, and I really appreciate the quantitative data showed. I think my comment might align with Councilmember Lee's comment, and just I think if we could put an emphasis on the qualitative data as well for the community members that are experiencing these disparities directly during this process and after, I think that would be really important to incorporate into this strategy. So just wanted to note that and say thank you again.
Chair Hall, if I could just really quick,
Of course.
Council, thank you so much for your wisdom and your support. You really make us better. You make us think about the ways that we're trying to think through these things and challenge us to think outside these boxes. So really just appreciate you all. And one thing I just wanted to share, we didn't get a ton into this. We've recently executed a partnership with a peer-led organization that is statewide, Mental Health Addictions Association of Oregon, that has a lot of experience with supporting people experiencing homelessness, as well as people that are living with various behavioral health disorders. And we are very excited about being able to bring them into these conversations around that qualitative work to say, hey, let's connect directly with people who have benefited from these services or who didn't get these services and needed them. And I think, just to your all's point about how we can use those conversations in a way to further our work around racial equity, being able to convene and support conversations with specific groups in this way, I think will be so critical for our ability to quickly transform the data collection into action. And making sure that we're not continuing to ask the same questions and doing the same thing over and over again, but really trying to make sure that we're thinking about ways that we can change our actions to reduce these disparities and make change in our system. So appreciate you all, and thanks for the time today.
Thank you. And I believe we're ready now to move on to home ownership, and we've got some bond approvals to take care of. Do we have Scott Shaw on the line, scheduled presenter on this?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Director Giscombe.
Can I take a quick second to update the council?
Sure.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair Hall, respected members of council, and Director Bell. My name is Keeble Giscombe, the Director of Home Ownership. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I would like to give a brief update to address concerns that were brought to the Housing Stability Council attention on March 21st of this year by Loan Depot. The issue that were summarized in the email surrounds unfair and inappropriate approval practices, which were restricted Oregon Flex loan benefits to Oregon future homeowners. OHCS goal in establishing our lender RFA was to encourage qualified lenders to offer OHCS lending programs. We take claims of discriminatory practice seriously and audit our entire approved lenders applications. We were encouraged that all approved lenders complied with the requirements listed in the RFA. In addition, we also reviewed requirements from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac regarding their scorecard. And as a lending program, we're encouraged that our regulatory requirements do not create an undue burden to lenders. On Wednesday of this week, April 3rd, we met with Mr. Rugg from Loan Depot and discussed the previous incomplete application. As our conversation went on, it became apparent that we, OHCS and Loan Depot, were finally speaking the same language. We were encouraged that they understood the regulatory requirements, and as a result of the successful meeting, we mutually agreed that if Loan Depot resubmits a complete application with the required documents, we believe we will be able to move forward. OHCS honor all our partnership with lenders and support the state as we work towards equitable pathways to homeownership. And I would just really like to thank council for this time to update on that matter that was brought to our attention on March 21st. And from there, I would just like for us to introduce Mr. Scott Shaw as he speaks to council. Thank you for your time today, council and Director Bell.
Thank you.
Good morning, Director Bell, Chair Hall, and council members. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Scott Shaw. I am the Assistant Director of Homeownership Lending, and what I'm bringing forward to you today is a bond loan file for your approval. So, in background, there is a memo included in your packet. But state statute requires the Housing Stability Council establish a loan threshold for loans to be reviewed prior to purchase. And the current threshold is loans that are greater than 95% of the applicable area program purchase price get Housing Stability Council approval. So the staff has reviewed this particular loan. There's only one today. We've concluded the borrowers and the property meets all of the relevant program guidelines for our residential loan program. All the documents have been included, they've been executed, they've been received, and the loan is approved for purchase. Additionally, it is also it's been guaranteed by VA. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, I ask for your approval. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Sorry about that, folks, but stuck on mute, but we have a motion in a second. Now let's have the roll call, please. See what we have to say about it.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFontorum.
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Harris.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, thanks, everybody. And that brings us to our scheduled 15-minute break in the agenda. It's happening about 15 minutes earlier, so please do your best to be back here and ready to reconvene at 10:45. See you then. Good morning, everybody. Once again, it is 10:45 on Friday, April 5th, 2024. And we're reconvening at this point, the monthly meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. And we're going to have the Affordable Rental Housing Division taking us the rest of the way.
Before we get to that, Chair Hall, we do need to open up the forum for a public hearing testimony section on the
yeah.
Oregon loan approval.
Thank you. You called that to my attention in a message. Okay, at this point, we need to open up a public hearing and receive comments. The only purpose is to receive comments on the, now we're doing the bond lending item. I'm sorry, which one?
Yes, the
Yeah,
Oregon bond loan approvals.
the Oregon bond loan approval.
I think it's actually the 9% low-income housing tax credit NOFA approvals.
We also have to open it up, Natasha, for the home ownership division for their bonds.
So Chair Hall, if I may just add a point of clarity,
Okay,
we are going back for just a moment to home
Mhm.
ownership. We just went through and did approvals for the bond loan approvals for the home ownership department. At that time, it was noticed that it was missed, that we need to briefly open it up for a public hearing. So we are doing that now to yield for public hearing comments, if there is any. The approval still stands, but we still need to go through that process. Once that's completed, we'll move right along to affordable rental housing.
okay, so we'll declare the public hearing open first for the Oregon bond loan approvals under the home ownership division. Is there any public testimony related specifically to these approvals? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and will now open the public hearing and receive the staff report. I believe first off on LIHTC, the 9% as we just heard. So is there a presentation?
We do have a presentation. Do we take public comments in advance?
Generally, I think, we're still working this through, but generally, I think in meetings where I've presided, we do the staff presentation to be followed by public comment period and then council discussion.
Great. Okay. Well, hello. It's still morning. Good morning, Chair Hall, council members, Director Bell. This is Natasha Detweiler Davy, she, her pronouns with the Affordable Rental Housing Division. I'm really excited to be with you here this morning. We have kind of a historic moment here in that it is our last NOFA recommendation that we are bringing forward to Housing Stability Council before we transition into our new process. So it's very an exciting moment, and we have a really compelling list of projects that are being recommended. So I'm very excited to be able to hand this discussion off to Jackie Santiago, our tax credit program analyst, to lead us through this conversation, along with Amy Cole, the Development Resources Manager, and Roberto Franco, Assistant Director. With that, I'll mute myself.
Thank you, Natasha. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and members of the council. My name is Jacqueline Santiago, and I'm the LIHTC Program Analyst for the 9%. Next slide. Today, I'll be presenting a summary of the 2023 NOFA offering, the scoring categories, and the rules for ranking, as well as the projects recommended for funding. Next slide. The NOFA, also known as the Notice of Funding Availability, was released on August 25th of 2023. Questions related to the NOFA were answered through published updates to our FAQs, and we closed the NOFA on November 13th of 2023. Next slide. In this NOFA, we offered $10 million in estimated 2025 9% tax credits. These credits were split into several set-asides, including preservation, tribal, and 4 geographic regions. We also had 2 cut-across set-asides that require 10% for nonprofits and 10% for culturally specific organizations. We also offered GAP, home, OHCCs, and PSH rental and operations subsidy. Next slide. We received 12 applications, 17.3 million in tax credits, 7.2 million in GAP, 23.6 million in home, and 10.8 million in OHCCs, with a total of 591 units. 9 applications were received through our regional set-asides, 2 through preservation, and 1 through tribal. Next slide, please. This breakdown shows those requests by their set-asides, with the most coming from our balance of state, urban, regional set-aside. So this is the breakdown of just the amounts across those set-asides. Next slide, please. Applications were scored through 8 categories and split by new construction, acquisition, rehab, and preservation. The QAP guides this competitive scoring process, which received its last update in December of 2022. Next slide, please. After the projects are scored by a team of scorers, they are ranked first within their individual set-asides for the first funding pass. Projects with the highest score are selected within those set-asides until funds are insufficient to fully fund the next highest ranking project. If the highest ranking project has requested more funding than has been reserved for the set-aside, they move to the next funding pool. For the second funding pass, uncommitted funds from the tribal land set-aside are pooled to the non-metro PJ set-aside, and any uncommitted funds from the balance of state, regions, rural, and urban are combined to fund the next highest ranking project within their combined pool. For the third funding pass, all remaining uncommitted funds from all set-asides are combined to the statewide pool. The remaining projects will be ranked against one another, and the highest scoring projects will be selected until all funds are committed. Next slide, please. Out of the 12 applications, we are recommending 9 projects. These projects include 2 preservations, 1 tribal, 1 balance of state rural, 1 non-metro PJ, 1 metro, and 3 balance of state urban. 53.5% of the tax credits are going towards culturally specific organizations, and 54% are going towards nonprofits. We are recommending a total of $13.3 million in tax credits, $5.2 million in GAP, $15.3 million in home, and $8.5 million in OHCCs. Next slide. I will now give you a brief overview of those 9 recommended projects, starting off with Allen Creek Crossing, located in Grants Pass. Allen Creek Crossing will be serving unhoused youth, at-risk youth and their families, as well as workforce individuals and their families. This project includes a culturally responsive owner and property manager, partnerships with culturally specific and responsive organizations, and a culturally responsive service provider. Next slide. Also, apartments in Gresham will serve persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Also known as Advocates for Life Skills and Opportunity, is a culturally specific nonprofit disability support organization. This project includes a culturally specific owner, partnerships with culturally specific organizations, and a culturally responsive property manager and culturally specific service providers. Next slide, please. Burlwood Apartments is a preservation project in Portland. Burlwood has a number of 2- and 3-bedroom units and therefore will serve large families. This includes a culturally responsive owner and service providers, as well as a culturally specific and responsive partnerships. Next slide. Colonia del Valle Prospero, formerly known in your packet as Colonia Solidaridad in Albany, will be serving the area's workforce and agricultural workers, as well as communities of color. The developer, owner, and property manager are culturally specific, with a large majority of BIPOC leadership and staff. The sponsor, Farm Worker Housing Development Corporation, is also a nonprofit organization. They will partner with culturally specific organizations and service providers. Next slide. Klamath LIHTC number 1 in Chiloquin will be located in tribal trust land and will serve tribal members, elders, and families with children. The developer is a culturally specific nonprofit organization. The owner and property manager are also culturally specific, with the majority of BIPOC leadership and staff. They will partner with culturally specific service providers as well. Next slide, please. Majestic Garden Apartments is a preservation portfolio consisting of 5 properties in Redmond, Veneta, Harrisburg, and Junction City. They will serve seniors and families, and they will be partnering with culturally responsive organizations and service providers that include BIPOC leadership and staff. Next slide, please. 9 Peaks in Bend will be serving seniors, families, and people living with disabilities. The developer is a nonprofit organization and will be partnering with organizations that provide culturally specific and responsive services. Next slide. Voyagers Village, located in Salem, is a culturally specific housing project serving the working families in the Micronesian community. The Micronesian Islander community is a female-led, culturally specific nonprofit organization. The owner, property manager, and service providers are culturally specific with the majority of BIPOC leadership and staff, and will include partnerships with culturally specific and responsive organizations. Next slide. Wickiup Station in Lapine will serve veterans, very low income workforce, and family households. The developer is a nonprofit organization, and the owner and property manager are culturally responsive, as well as the service provider being culturally specific. Next slide. For applicants not selected for funding recommendation, we will conduct a NOFA debrief session and provide feedback on their application. I am happy to answer any questions and ask you to consider the updated motion on the next slide. The motion has been updated to reflect the change in the name of the FHDC project, Colonia Solidaridad to Colonia de Valle Prospero. Next slide. And thank you.
All right, we do have the public hearing open. So at this time, I will ask if there is anyone who wishes to offer public testimony specifically related to this funding recommendation. If so, please use the raise hand function on Zoom. We'll give you a moment to do that. And so we have no indication of anyone offering a comment on this.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm going to close the public hearing, open it up for deliberations and action by the council.
So moved.
Anybody with a second?
I'll second.
Thanks so much. Could we have the roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFontorum,
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell,
Yes.
Chair Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mena,
Yes.
Councilmember Harris,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I just want to give abundance of appreciation to Jackie, Amy, Angela Parada, and all of the evaluators and applicants for that NOFA. Roberto, I forgot to say your name in there, but you're in there too. This is an incredible cohort of projects, and I'm incredibly just thankful that we were able to get these through. And as we are transitioning into our new process, knowing that we have really invested in some critical projects here as well. So just an abundance of gratitude and excitement for all of our next steps here. Thank you
so much.
So next on our agenda for affordable rental housing, we are transitioning into discussion largely around our what we are now referring, instead of NOFA, to the ORCA, the Oregon Consolidated Centralized Application for Affordable Rental Housing Resources. And so this is a familiar subject that we have been talking about for many months. First up, I will Mitch Hanush and I will walk through funding, resources, and set-asides. This was kind of an addition to our prior discussion. So we have introduced a lot of this. We're continuing to evolve and expand on our introduction that we are bringing forward today. And then after this first item, we will check in with the policy team on the introduction of our evaluation standards to be incorporated. These are all topics that we've been talking about, but now we're pulling them together with the idea that we will be making final recommendations, hopefully next month. So I didn't update the date on that slide, but I do believe this is the right presentation. So I'm just going to do a quick reprise here, just to ground us to where we have been. So the objectives of this funding update is to increase access to resources, grow our pipeline, lessening the risk of funding gaps, as we have discussed a lot of times. This has been a volatile market over the last 3 years, and hoping that our new process is landing us in a place where we have more planful resiliency in our structure and our approach to funding projects. And critical to all of that is increasing clarity and consistency so that projects and development teams and organizations, cities that are engaging in development work know what they are needing to perform to in a consistent way across all of our resources, identifying that as an incredible way to foster expansion of our pipeline overall, to have that predictability in place. We have, over the past several months, identified some of our own key values that are driving decision-making and recommendations that are bringing forward to today. We want to be aligned with the executive order, prioritizing and giving a lot of effort and energy to new production needs. We want to have predictable and available resources. We want to make sure to embed tenant-centered strategies. We need to serve the state, not just one community, and we need to embed equity and racial justice in all kinds of ways across all of those strategies. We'll start seeing some new graphic representations in our in the next presentation about the evaluation process. But again, this is the familiar one where we're deconstructing that what was this one NOFA evaluation process into an expanded centralized application structure where we're evaluating smaller pieces at a time so that there is both ability to provide resource certainty earlier, but secure final resources a bit later. We are embodying many different strategies around centering equity and racial justice. Of course, certainly with the project characteristics, how are we meeting BIPOC tenant needs? And then also, how are we approaching our financial investments? How are we prioritizing investments through culturally specific and BIPOC-owned organizations, fostering investments through MWSB firms, through resource set-asides and other diversity, equity, and inclusion agreements to make sure that we are investing resources to organizations that are leading also and fostering their own growth in equity and racial justice. So with that, I'm going to ask Mitch Hanush to probably introduce himself and do a brief talk through the resources that you've seen before, but we'll want to continue to reiterate as we get closer to final recommendation.
Thanks, Natasha. Hi, council members and Chair Hall. My name is Mitch Hanush. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst with ARH. And yeah, quickly go through, you've seen a lot of this before, but just want to kind of keep re-emphasizing some of the changes that we've made and not made, and thinking through kind of what these resources will be available for, how much will be available, and things along those lines. Again, you've seen this table generally breaking out capital and credits, but thinking about capital kind of more broadly than we have in the past, where it's not one specific resource, and instead thinking about capital in terms of what we're statutorily required for different funding sources to be utilized for, and then carving out some specific set-asides for populations that have distinct needs or challenges using the other resources that we have available. And then the credits, importantly, no LIHTC this year, which I know you've heard a few times. So yeah, again, just to reiterate the last slide, general development dollars, most funding is going in there. Most of our great investment in LIFT that we got from the legislature is going to be used in that bucket. We will have permanent supportive housing as part of those 11Q bonds carved out for that specific use. Preservation is a distinct bucket of funding that we're using it for. That's between kind of 3 different potential preservation options, including physical and financial risk of loss, portfolio stabilization, and properties with federal project-based rent assistance risk of loss. We'll also have dollars for manufactured park preservation, dollars specific to funding projects with tribal communities, and veteran funding for projects that include veterans units.
Great. And then, oh, I forgot one other slide here, Mitch, sorry.
All good. And so the Ag Workforce Capital we brought to you last month, and then we presented it to the facilitation team, Ag Workforce Housing Facilitation Team, and got good feedback there on the framework that we presented. So our proposing adoption of that framework, which, as you'll remember, includes a 25% carve out for pre-development grants that'll align with the pre-development program. And then 2/3 of the remainder will be set aside for culturally specific organizations or projects that are located in rural communities that have access to agricultural work opportunities, with up to $2 million of the remainder being available for manufactured park preservation for agricultural workforce as well.
And then moving down, that funding, what is now the funding that we have available. I keep wanting to say calendar, but it's really the year. So those were all of the development resources that Mitch identified. We have now added a couple new components here, or expanded components, identifying and I think I seeded this last month, but $30 million to go towards LASCAP resources for our current pipeline, which is currently struggling to continue to move forward. We're expanding our alignment with capacity resources through our ORCA structure, continuing to offer land acquisition resources. Pre-development, we have previously adopted that structure for the $9.7 million. And then anything that we are offering this year that is not fully subscribed just rolls into next year, along with added resources. To dig in a little bit on those 2 newer components, the LASCAP resources, and there's some more information around this in the packet as well. But looking to provide that $30 million to provide some tools for remedy for projects that are either under construction and facing urgent and critical funding gaps that are preventing them from stabilizing or completing construction to begin having tenants move in. Or for those projects that are currently on desks with teams working on them, but unable to move forward given changes in the financial market and new funding gaps. And the strategy here is to be able to have some tools, but also be able to provide clarity around are we going to be able to address the gap or not? Meaning that we want to be incentivizing production, and where we have projects that are not viable or no longer viable, it would be prudent for those resources to be returned, and then the new project to be cast forward with a complete financial package that's feasible in today's market to reapply for resources. And hopefully the majority of them are feasible with modest intervention. And I think those are the ongoing conversations that we are continuing to engage in, but looking at using that $30 million in resources to prioritize both investments to address gaps in projects under construction and those projects that are beginning to construct or seeking to begin construction, where an increase of 10% on the subsidy from the initial investment would get them over the hump, or for those seeking to begin construction as we finalize subsidy limits, whether the new subsidy limits would be helpful, or a cap perhaps of 10% from the initial investment would make sense. In using and deploying this resource, I think I'm incredibly interested in using and creating policies that are incentivizing production. So as developers and as development teams are accessing these resources, use this as a means for transitioning out of the prior reservation letter into the new conditional commitment structure that provides clear accountability for performance, and where those deadlines and that timing is not met, the project would return the resources and be able to reapply when they are ready to move forward, but that we don't want to artificially hold resources to be able to support that could otherwise be supporting another project that could be moving forward. And so really wanting this to be a critical place where we can kind of clean through what has become stagnant on our desks to make sure that we are delivering those resources to community. Not with a hat of not wanting those projects to be successful, but wanting us to make sure that we are having the correct financial package structure and partners in projects that are able to deliver those resources through. And so I think in a lot of cases where that might not be feasible as they had initially designed it, a redesign and a resubmission would be more successful than continuing to try the current framing of some of those projects. And hopefully it's a limited number. We've also expanded the capacity resources. I think this previously I had flagged on the calendar with $3 million. We have since updated that to be $4.8 million with a total investment per recipient of $150,000 and holding resources to be able to serve all of the 9 Native nations, all of the balance of state public housing authorities, and then pretty large number of culturally specific organizations. So holding those resources for those organizations and entities to access them for the first 6 months. And then if they are not using them, then we would be able to more broadly able to open up more spots for other eligible organizations, being nonprofit, rural, culturally specific organizations. So I think with that, I'm going to pause there before we go into set asides, just to see if there's any questions that we want to discuss now at this moment around the resource calendar and how we are approaching those funds.
Council, any questions or feedback at this point?
Okay.
All right.
Great. Seeing none, I'm going to hand it back to Mitch to talk through set aside recommendations.
Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, so this is again mostly a reminder, just to refresh your memory on sort of where we've been at. We are kind of proposing pretty similar recommendation for this that we have in previous meetings, but reemphasizing that these set asides are primarily to respond to impacts of systemic inequality, thinking about how can we equitably serve communities of color, culturally specific organizations, and nonprofits in rural communities who've historically been underserved by us and other kind of state agencies, and making sure we're really targeting investment in those communities that have not been invested in previously. Also thinking about production statewide and how we can ensure we're serving the entire state and not allowing all of the resources to be grouped into one specific region. So with that, the proposal is still to take 25% off the top as organizational set aside specific to culturally specific organizations and nonprofit development in rural communities. Again, that's attempting to sort of equitably target those resources and ensure that if those organizations might take a little bit longer to put their applications together or are in any other way sort of delayed, that there won't be suddenly no resources for them to access that is there for them to apply for when they're ready. The 75% remainder is getting divided up between these 3 regions. Really, it's Eastern Oregon is east of the Cascades, Western is Willamette Valley and the coast, and Metro is those 3 metro counties, Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington. And the breakout here is, as you can see, that kind of, again, this is for the capital funding. So taking that kind of capital and tax credit funding available for this year and dividing it by these percentages that's kind of weighted according to the ONA data, which is where this map comes from, is the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, and then also looking at BIPOC households in each of these regions as well.
I was muted. Great. And so the last topic underneath this header is I think I've talked with you about cost controls and oversight in the past, but this is the more formal introduction of that. Just as a reminder of where we are, where we have previously been living in a competitive space where we are able to make sure that we are giving points to our values to drive. So if for cost and subsidy, we would give points where you needed lesser subsidy. So there was a checks and balance inherent to the way that we pointed those resources, which over time and in this volatile marketplace became very challenging to feel were impactful, because as project needs change and shift, as the market changes, changes and shifts. Holding accountability to what you thought you could do 2 years ago didn't really have the same impact as when we had a stagnant market. So moving from a competitive structure to a performance-based evaluation, we can't depend on that point structure. We want to make sure that we are able to be market responsive. Although we are working in an affordable space, we are also working in a development market that is influenced by all of the same things those in the market are experiencing. So we need to make sure that we're balancing all of those needs as we establish our structure around cost controls. So we need to balance our workflow and shift to make sure we're looking at real and accurate market environment, bring clear controls in different ways than we have thought about them and applied them in the past. The overview of the cost control structure that we intend to go forward is a three-pronged approach where we have policy controls in place that are allowing us to incorporate controls around where we are putting resources and where we would allow for increases and things like the developer fee, where we allow project cost savings to go, and where we are looking at identifying and protecting the really core pieces of projects that that are meaningful in achieving the objective. So if it's a family project and the initial project indicated there would be park space and playgrounds, that should remain part of it and should not be eligible for value engineering to get to the bottom line that doesn't accurately serve the tenants that were anticipated for the project. We want to make sure we're doing thorough cost evaluation. We want to make sure that we're seeing real project costs, getting detailed pro forma items of those resources, and using our own data through a predictive cost model to understand where we're seeing things that we wouldn't expect in terms of those costs. Not as a gatekeeper for yes or no for an investment, but for a way to funnel where we need more detailed examination and understanding about why the project costs are out of alignment with what we would expect to see in those projects. And then lastly, and the piece that Housing Stability Council traditionally would approve are the subsidy limits that we are providing for projects, looking to do this a little bit differently than we have in the past, where we had NOFA by NOFA, different subsidy limits and different population types and project types. And instead, what we are proposing doing is having one set of subsidy limits for these resources that will not be paired with tax credits, that are scaled by what IMI is a project serving, and then how large are the units. So are they, is it a 2-bedroom that is serving a 30% household? That should merit additional subsidy because there will be less rental income and or more project needs for operating those units than those that are serving higher bands of projects. Scaling different subsidy limits for new construction versus acquisition and rehab. And then another shift is that line on the bottom that has a up to $200,000 per project additional subsidy that would be eligible where you have cases where there's unique functional building needs to meet tenant life safe and healthy for the target population. So as we're thinking about agricultural workforce projects, those are tenants with occupations where you need different types of community spaces to be able to make sure that you are safely protecting the outside elements from it getting into individual homes and impacting the people within them. And so looking at that all about how we calculate the maximum eligible subsidy that a project is able to access. And I think as we are talking through the details, which are a little bit more unpacked in the memo, most certainly, but wanting to make sure that we're able to have clear subsidy limits in place, but also preserve some reasonable flexibility within that 10% range as we are reaching that final commitment stage when things happen, to make sure that we are being planful about that and not surprised by that at the back end. These are the initial drafts that we had shared before. We have gotten a lot of good input from our engagement conversations and surveys, which I expect to be incorporating back in to the final recommendation that we would be bringing hopefully next month. And so I think that that is the bulk of this topic, on the presentation on this topic, certainly open for any conversation and discussion. We still do still have a couple other items underneath the ORCA umbrella to talk about next.
Okay, council, Councilmember Lee, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thanks, Mitch and Natasha and everybody for the work and the presentation. I'm continue to be super excited about all of this. Just one question, and you don't need, there's not a response, is, you know, the data that Mike Savara presented in terms of where there's disproportionality in terms of homelessness and rental instability feels like it could be really nicely linked and sort of matrixed with the information that you all are looking at in terms of your evaluation criteria and how you're looking at whether projects are really getting to the crux of the issue or, you know, being responsive to our value statements. And it would be very nice to see that data influencing this project and this project influencing that data, because although it often appears that the funding, you know, the funding categories are complete silo and they can't touch each other, I think part of our, you know, secret sauce at OHCS is to try to look beyond that. And you all are engaged in deep looking beyond at this point. So I'd love to see perhaps if there's some exploration of linking that overrepresentation on the homelessness and rental insecurity side to the production of the housing projects that you all are considering, because I think it could be very powerful. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Councilmember Lee. I will, we will make sure to loop back with Mike and figure out how we can carry that perspective over in even just looking at our set asides and where we're dedicating resources. So we'll follow up on that for sure. Thank you.
Any more council input at this point? If not, let's keep going.
Sounds great. So our next topic on our agenda is our evaluation standards. And so we have Mitch Hanush and Love Johnson here, along with Rick Ruzicka, to be able to introduce that item. So I will hand it off to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Hi, Chair Hall, members of the council, Director Bell. My name is Love Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I started at OHCS in the fall, so it's very nice to meet you, and I really appreciate your time. I'm going to pull up my slideshow here really quick. All right, so I'm going to be talking about the evaluation standards in the ORCA today. We've discussed these before, and we'll go into a little more detail today. There's also a lot more information in the memo in your packet. Let's see. So as you're probably familiar, after projects submit their initial intake form, they'll go through the 3 steps of the ORCA. So we have impact assessment, financial eligibility, and commitment. In each step, there's a set of what we're calling evaluation standards that'll help us look at a project's potential impact as it moves through the process. And kind of within each step, there's some pre-existing standards that we've used in previous NOFAs. There's some standards that we've changed or enhanced a little bit that are also pretty familiar. And then there's some new standards that we've created in this ORCA process. So I'll go through each of those. But I want to step back just a little bit. So the evaluation standards are only one part of how the ORCA does equity and racial justice. You've heard earlier about the set-asides, pre-development, and some of the other pieces of the process. But as I go through the evaluation standards, I'll dig a little deeper into how racial equity plays into them. And so when we were coming up with the standards, we did a REAT, or a racial equity analysis toolkit, right about in the midway point. So you heard about the REAT a couple months ago from my colleagues Chelsea and Megan, and it covers these categories. So goals, engagement, data, benefits and burdens, and accountability. And so when we were designing the standards, we used the REAT to both kind of reflect on what we learned so far and to help us figure out how to keep designing things as we were going forward. We probably had like 10 plus people working on this REAT, and of course, drawing upon the knowledge and the work of many more people across the agency. And so you'll see the results of the REAT kind of woven throughout the standards, but it's gonna spend a little extra time on the ones that relate to racial equity. Okay, so the first step in the application process after projects submit their intake form is impact assessment. This is kind of the media step. It's where there's the most evaluation standards, and it's where the council will be involved, conditionally approving projects at this step. So to talk briefly about the pre-existing standards, these are the ones that we've kind of pulled from previous NOFAs, should be pretty familiar. So I'm not going to go through them all, but I will just touch on the first one briefly, the Affirmative Fair Housing Marketing Plan. This is a federal form from HUD that applicants for funding have to fill out, where they identify the communities that are least likely to apply for housing based on the area's demographics. So this could be various communities of color, people with disabilities, or other groups of people. And then they have to come up with a marketing strategy with things like local organizational contacts or specific media outlets, things like that. So we'll be requiring this going forward for all projects. So these are the standards that we've modified or changed or enhanced a little bit. We'll dig into some of them, but again, they should be pretty familiar. So at this step, we're asking for early estimates of construction costs and early pro forma, some things around location factors and resident services, which we discussed previously, as well as some information based on our preservation program. But I want to dig into a couple of these standards. So first, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Agreement. OHCS has had a DEI agreement for a while, but we've really updated this to make it both more robust and more flexible. So organizations can pick from goals from each of these categories that apply to them. They're both internally and externally oriented. This DEI agreement is based on a tool called the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmarks, which was created based on interviews with over 100 experts across the globe. It's a validated tool. So applicants will submit an initial DEI agreement with OHCS, and then they'll submit kind of an annual update where they will update us on their progress on the goals that they've picked. And they can also connect with us to talk about their DEI agreement and their work if they want to. Another standard I want to dig into a little more is the MWESB strategy. So you heard, I think last month, from our colleague Claudia Cantu about the great work she's done on this front. So this standard is really building on that work. At this point, applicants who have developed with OHCS funding before will have to show that they've met the regional percentage goals for their previous projects, which you can kind of see the regions in this map here. If applicants haven't developed with our funding before, they're going to answer a couple of questions about a strategy that they come up with to make sure they can meet those goals. And if applicants have not have developed with us but haven't met their goals, they also have to work with an MWESB consultant. Okay, so returning back to the standards, we want to talk about some new standards here at the impact assessment step. We'll dig into the first two, but the other ones really ask about any infrastructure requirements that might be in place at your site. So you can have clear expectations up front about what those are from the city or the jurisdiction, and then we can all kind of problem solve on that together if need be. It asks for an early permit strategy. So basically, what's your timeline for submitting permits? Have you made early contact with the permitting jurisdiction? And then it asks if you've done your pre-qualification by this point. But to dig into some of these new standards a little bit, we've created one called Engagement and Community Needs. And so this is asking for the intended tenant communities that your project is going to serve, including communities of color, what existing engagement have you done and or can you draw upon about those specific communities? Have you as the applicant already done engagement with this community? Or can you pull on some engagement others have done, like planning documents from the city, or maybe engagement documents from community-based organizations, things like that. And then looking at that engagement, what have you learned about the needs of that specific tenant community that you're planning to serve? And importantly, how does the design of your building and your site actually meet those needs? How does it contribute to the health and well-being of those communities through your unit sizes that you're planning, amenities, community spaces on site? And this is also a great place to talk about accessibility interventions you might be designing to meet the needs of people with different types of disabilities. And another new standard we created is really about actions related to equity and racial justice. So on the left side here, we have a couple of actions that are required for all projects. The first one is asking projects to collect demographic data on who's living in their buildings. So this is already a requirement for many of our buildings, and we're sort of just making this universal. These next two are about language proficiency and translation. So what's your plan to translate your written materials? Does your property management staff speak the languages that your tenants will be speaking? And if not, what's your plan to communicate messages to people speaking those languages? And then this last one asks about any specifically racial equity related efforts your organization has made, like could be strategic planning, things like that. So those are required for all projects. And then over here, we have this list where projects will pick 2 of 6. And we wanted to do this to kind of provide some actions that are flexible enough for different projects in different contexts and locations to be able to meet, but that are still meaningful. So these first 2 on this list over here about ownership of the project, kind of to recognize the value of projects that are owned by culturally specific organizations and BIPOC entities. This is actually based on something Washington State has done. So this next one here is about plans for utilizing BIPOC-owned businesses in your project. So kind of MBEs and other BIPOC-owned businesses as a subset of that MWESB umbrella. Do you have existing relationships with those businesses? Have you worked with them before? Things like that. Then we ask, are you offering any culturally specific services to specific communities of color? We ask about whether the tenant populations of your buildings reflect the racial demographics of the locations that they're in. And then finally, we ask if you have any data on tenant outcomes, such as eviction rates or turnover or tenancy length. Some folks are collecting data on that, and if they see disparity, what interventions are you doing? What steps are you taking to address that? So again, these are a list of 6 that people can pick 2 options from. So should be pretty flexible, but still meaningful. That's what we were going for there. All right, so now we're moving on to the second step in the application process, which is financial eligibility. For this step, we have some pre-existing standards that also should be pretty familiar. At this point, applicants are going to submit more developed architectural plans, a more developed pro forma that meets our underwriting guidelines, letters of interest from any other funders, and evidence that they've submitted their permits at this point. We have one sort of enhanced standard related to construction costs. So this asks about how construction costs estimates may have changed since the impact assessment step. And then we will assess that based on this cost model that Natasha mentioned that we're developing based on data that we have about similar projects to kind of see where those costs line up. And then we're going to ask about any policy changes from impact assessment. So that means, are there any sort of substantive material changes to your project that sort of fundamentally change what it is? So this could be things like, are you having to move sites? Are you changing the number of units in a big way, or the affordability levels in a significant way? If so, you may have to return to impact assessment and start from there. And then finally, we get to the commitment step. So the last step, this is where projects have to demonstrate their readiness to proceed to closing. Projects are almost done, and at this point, the standards are really about confirming and buttoning things up. So they'll be submitting final architectural plans that match the ones they're submitting to the permitting jurisdiction, information about federal subsidy layering if that's something that they're pursuing, and a final pro forma. And then they'll also be committing to a closing date at this point. And that closing date is going to be no less than 6 months out from the funding award. So if the project can't meet that timeline that they've committed to for themselves, then they risk losing that funding commitment and having to return back to previous steps. So this is really about readiness and making sure that projects are able to move into construction soon. So that's what I have for you today. There's more info in your memo. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, but I'll leave it there and I'll open it up for questions if you want.
Any questions or feedback from council? Any feedback? Last call. Yes, we covered it all. Thank you. Oh, wait a minute, Councilmember Mania.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I just wanted to commend the team in terms of the outreach that has happened, the work the feedback that they received, they're implementing some of the feedback into that work. It is a tremendous lift, and you know, and we hope that it is all for the benefit of the communities that we serve. And it's definitely going to be challenging. So it's just great work, and in terms of the outreach, and there's some interesting decisions that we'll be making coming very soon. Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
Thanks, Chair Hall. And thank you for the presentation. A lot of course, really great information. I just have one question regarding the financial eligibility portion of it. And you mentioned that the construction costs can be reevaluated. I'm assuming that this is to cover any escalation or inflation costs, but I'm also wondering if that's intended to cover anything that comes up in the permitting process, such as right-of-way improvements or anything that's kind of mandated by the jurisdiction that wasn't initially part of the project budget. If you could provide any more information on that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is the intention of this question at this step, but I'm maybe going to pass it to Mitch if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I think that totally. So at the impact assessment phase, it really is a pretty high level budget, and we're asking folks to estimate costs, you know, early on. In that financial eligibility stage, it's really about getting your LOIs from your lenders and getting construction bids and really buttoning up what those final costs should look like. And so we'd hope that that budget, that they're the pro forma that they're bringing to us at the financial eligibility stage, would account for all of those extra costs. We understand that there might be some wiggle room between there and the commitment stage, which is why we're asking for another pro forma at the commitment stage, and allowing some level of flexibility there, more limited than at the impact assessment phase, but are hoping at that financial eligibility stage that that's pretty close to the final cost amount that they'll be bringing forward.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Mania.
I forgot to lower my hand. Apologize.
Any other feedback input from the council at this point? Hearing none, I guess we'll move along.
Great. Thank you, Chair Hall, Council, and Love, Mitch, Rick, and so many people within Affordable Rental Housing Division, program, production, policy operations. I mean, this is I can't understate group effort, I think, and has been an incredible lift and just really impressive and exciting to see. And we are also thinking about implementing this as we are introducing these items, aspiring towards having some final recommendations for you, which hopefully is coming to you in May, to be able to officially finalize documents to move forward. In the meantime, we are also carrying through with some of the testing strategies and other conversations that we have had to date. So I have up next Ed Brown and Amy Cole to talk about our soft launch strategy that we'll be moving forward with. We are also intending later this month to open our initial intake process to be able to start just getting all of everybody's pipelines and information. Those aren't formal applications, but those are just getting the lay of the land for us to know what is coming next. So with that, I'll hand it off to you, Ed.
Thank you, Natasha, for that lead in. I am Ed Brown. I'm the Development Applications Manager for the ARH Division. Good morning, Housing Stability Council members, Chair Hall and Director Bell. We're getting really close now to opening the ORCA, and we're excited to see all of the elements falling into place. As we prepare to launch the ORCA, we're embarking on testing our new systems to ensure that we have a successful launch. On the last two pages of the packet, pages 82 and 83, sharing here. We outline our soft launch selection rationale, and that's what I'll be sharing with you. In the memo, we outline our reasons for this limited soft launch, which is really centered around providing the opportunity to meticulously analyze to detail just how well, or more importantly, how maybe not well, any component of our new ORCA application may be operating. A limited participation soft launch will provide us that space and opportunity to do just that. As we identify areas of rapid improvement, we also need the capacity and space to make those meaningful adjustments to ensure a smooth flow through the application. To help us create the rationale to filter our project candidates for this, we started by asking what the intention and goals are to help create a rationale that would accomplish those goals. We need to limit the number of projects we test with. We need a diverse selection of projects to test each corner of our system. And we need partners and projects that are ready to act on completing an application. The memo mentioned that this test period is just a few weeks before the official launch of the ORCA. We limited our rationale to partners who do not have projects in our pre-closing pipeline, which we know takes a lot of capacity. So we need to move swiftly and with intention with our early testers to ensure we're testing every element, leaving no stone unturned to test the ORCA prior to launch. Our selective soft launch strategy, we feel, reflects our commitment to fair, meticulous testing and improvement. With a focused approach, we aim to ensure a seamless transition to launch. Thank you for your time today and to share our update on the strategy as we move forward in this pivotal evolution. I'd like to speak openly with the council on any questions, comments you might have. And I do have Amy Cole with me here to join and help support any conversation.
All right, council. Questions, feedback at this point? Well, hearing none, I guess so far so good.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. We'll be moving forward with this soft launch concept. I love the idea to test real things before we have to be at scale and hopefully flag some early areas where we can improve before we launch. And so I think for next steps, again, we'll be moving forward with these strategies, working to finalize all of the various frameworks to bring back to you in our future meeting. And if you have other thoughts, concerns that come up between now and then, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I believe this brings us to the close of our agenda. Director Bell, I just want to make sure that there isn't anything else we need to take up for the good of the order.
I appreciate that, Chair Hall. I was actually just checking the time. This might be record time of completion. Time is a funny thing, and I can't believe we are at it. So I will not delay things, but I will just maybe mention a couple of things. Maybe just first off, since we just finalized a conversation pertaining to the ORCA, I won't pontificate on this for far too long, but I want to just extend such a very deep appreciation and gratitude for Natasha's leadership, the folks here on the screen from ARH, and all of the folks that are not here, that you can't see on the screen, that have helped support this effort. It is critically important. It is necessary in service to our goals, and it is a feat. It is a large, enormous feat. We won't get everything right along the way, and this is also about what growth and learning and adapting to that is. And to that effect, what I would say is, I know we rounded out the ORCA conversation specific to next steps, inclusive of that as the staff, as the team mentioned, which was testing. I expect that testing will be illuminating in more ways than one. And so unless specifically directed from the council as to the specific dimensions of what you want to hear from that testing and learning, we will just take the lead on bringing back the summary or synopsis of the things that we have learned or observed, and then how that has informed any decisions along the way. So that is just a standing place of feedback that we are happy to receive from the council. The last thing that I will leave you with, and then I'll yield to you, Chair Hall, which is really the totality of what you have heard in this specific agenda, I think is really a culmination of many of the things that the council has charged us to, which is we have talked a lot of time for a long time about our racial justice goals and values, and we got to get to work. So what you're seeing here represented certainly is what we hope you'll continue to see from us, which is really putting things into practice that we are learning, and to get beyond just words of solidarity when it comes to advancing racial justice across the organization. And so again, with full acknowledgement that we are imperfect and will learn and fumble along the way, we also have to pursue that level of progress. And so we appreciate the council diving into that, engaging with that with us, and also want to hope that council will let us know what you need along the way as the agency is growing and adapting and applying these things. We want to make sure that we're fully bringing our council along with us in that. So appreciation certainly to all the staff for the efforts today, and just appreciation for the council just supporting all the growth that's happening underway, and that will continue. So with an 11:46 roundup time, which might be record, so I'll stop talking. Chair Hall, it's all yours.
Thank you, Director Bell, and I don't think I've got anything to add, so I will invite everybody to join us on the first Friday in May for the next council meeting. And until then, we're going to stand in adjournment. Thanks.